Hi, Lorna.
Welcome to the Genealogy Radio Show, the radio show that's keeping you in the loop. And this week's show, we're looking at genealogical records from Wicklow, but we have a guest online who's got ancestry from Wicklow, Ian Temple. So welcome, Ian. What can you tell us about your family history research?
Well, thanks very much, Lorna. It's nice to be finally on the show. What I've been finding out basically is the history of my family, the Temple family, they're originally from Backstreet in Bray. After a few conversations with my relatives, I found out that nobody knew anything, like literally nothing. And there seems to have been a falling out in the family between, I think, my grandfather and his family. So that even added to the woes. But then I found out what was the most interesting thing was finding out that my great-grandmother was originally a different name. She wasn't a Kavanagh, she was Ashford, and that her father had passed away from epilepsy, it says on the death cert. And then that dug further and further, and I managed to get back to James Balance, a man from Gorey who was an RIC officer. And
lovely. And that's very interesting, because where we go from here, when we look at occupation, when we see a police officer, we know the police officers were moved around. They were never allowed to get too entrenched in a place in case they would develop loyalties to the place and the people instead of to the crown. They're moved on a continual basis until they get advanced in position or advanced in age. So that's why, even though you've got Gorey as a place, he may have been from further afield.
All right. And then I did find his death certificate, and that was, or death notice, and that was in Rathdown. So he must have moved to Rathdown, and then that's where my part of the family starts out.
And that's being moved to Rathdown.
Right.
So it's kind of significant here that we're looking at some occupations leading to movement and so on. Now, for Wicklow itself, there is some wonderful heritage, Wicklow heritage on a website, and we have aspects of Wicklow life in the early 19th century. So Wicklow itself was in a small market town. It was the county town, meaning the biggest town in the shire or the county, and it was no longer a parliamentary borough by the early 19th century, as it had been before the Union of 1801, but it was an assize town. So that means there would have been a courthouse, it would have held trials, and it had a jail. And it was an administrative centre of some importance. The population rose in that town from 2,046 in 1821 to nearly 3,000 in 1841. So it's significant when you see a 33% rise in population anywhere. Okay. Piggott's directory in the town. So if you have a look at Bray, where your ancestry is from, it's going to give you a list of the names of the occupations and the prominent inhabitants and some of the idea of the range of trades that are going on. And for our listeners, you know, these type of descriptions are important, as is Samuel Lewis in 1837, because Samuel Lewis, in his Topographical Dictionary of Wicklow, published in 1837, gives a rather unflattering description. Quote, "The houses are irregularly built, of very inferior appearance. The streets are narrow and neither paved nor lighted, but there is an ample supply of water from the springs. The town is a place of resort for sea bathing during the summer months, and would be much more frequented for this purpose were suitable accommodation provided for visitors."
May I ask you something, Lorna, really quick there about the first thing he says there about the inferior appearance of Wicklow? I just noticed that the date 1837, that would make it so 37 years after the Act of Union, all the effects of that Act of Union would start to be felt by then. So I think in some ways when I read accounts from that time talking about the inferior appearance of Ireland, I think that's a direct result of economic depression. Like, do you know, sorry, no, I don't think it's because of the people.
I know,
do you know what I mean?
It's good that he noticed it, because it is a county town. And he tells us that Morrock is a portion which is kept as a racecourse, and the border of lowland slopes gradually down to the stand. So they actually take the pebbles from that strand, and many of the pebbles are so esteemed for their beauty as to be bought up by the jewellers in Dublin to be wrought into necklaces and other ornaments. Several neat houses have been lately built on the Morrock, and hot and cold baths are in progress of erection. The thing about it is that these hot and cold bathing places are a result from George the Fourth in the Regency, who makes sea bathing popular down in Brighton, and that's a crown influence that has come over to Ireland. So the market is held on Saturday for butcher's meat, poultry and vegetables, which are exposed for sale in the market house and the shambles. There are no regular markets for corn, and the fairs were on March the 28th, May the 24th, August the 12th, which is today, and November the 25th. The trade is confined to the exportation of grain and copper and lead ore, of which 400 tons from the neighbouring mines are shipped weekly, and to the importation of coal, column, limestone, timber and iron. It's very industrial.
But you notice it's extractory, like they're extracting from the mines. There are no the factories. They've by the time, I think at this point 1825 was the limit from which I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lorna, the exchequers were supposed to be merged. So at this point Ireland has been fully converted into a just extract like any other colony, more so than before. And that's really
interesting, Ian, and thank you for that observation.
No,
I hadn't been aware of it.
It's just interesting when I didn't realize, look at all that coal, culm, limestone, timber, iron. That's enormous. I mean, you can imagine at that time, it was 1830, any of those times, Britain's fighting wars against China at this point, so they need everything they can get.
They can, but they'd stopped fighting the Napoleonic Wars, which made Ireland so rich, which was like the Celtic Tiger, because Ireland produced all the food for the fighting factions.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a great time in the Napoleonic times, but once that finished in 1815, we were in big trouble, and it sank us into depression. And with the tithe allotments, which we should look for the temples in the tithe allotments, and you can go on to the National Archives for our listeners to do that. They're free of charge and they're available online. And we can see that we've got a scattering of temples in Dublin, Derry, Donegal, Monaghan, Offaly, Wicklow, so on. It's quite a rare enough surname, and it's believed to have originated from the village of in Lothian in Scotland, originally as part of the Knights Templar. Had you heard that before?
But I went further, Lorna. I went not only there, but also there's links to Paris and the other Templar sites in London. So when I visited London about 2-3 years ago, I go to the temple area and I managed to, this was bizarre. I went up to the gate and I spoke to the guy on the gate. Turned out he was Irish, and he was from Parmastown, which is where I'm from, and which is originally owned by the Temple family, which is really even bizarre. And then he let me into the inner temple to have a look around. So the inner temple contains the mother church for the common law, the temple. So I'm not sure. There's two ways you can be named. You can either be from the Temple family lineage, which would put you in the lines of like Lord Henry Temple, Chancellors of Ireland, you name it. Some horrible people in some ways, but that's the way things were. And then the other thing was just obviously say like the one in Edinburgh, where you're named because you live in the vicinity of it. But I've no way of knowing at the moment which one I am or which lineage I go down. Like I said, like with the Balance name as well on my maternal side, could end up being, and I think it's looking like we're heading towards Europe.
That's
originally.
Very interesting.
I think
we've got some very interesting observations too in the parliamentary gazetteers. Gazetteers are really, really good because they start giving you quantities of and dates that infirmaries were built. So the infirmary, which catered for the entire eastern part of the county of Wicklow, had 303 patients in 1839, and the Fever Hospital had 376 patients. There was a parochial almshouse, and that was supported by the weekly collections of the church. The establishment of the poor law system in 1838, followed shortly by the opening of the workhouse in Rathdrum, removed some of the responsibility for poor relief from purely local resources. So, but whether this represents an improvement is debatable. So that's
that's the workhouse.
That's the workhouse in Rathdrum. And you had a relative, did you, that had some links there?
Margaret Ashford, John Temple's wife. Her mother, Anne Ashford, was married to William Ashford, and William Ashford dies in that workhouse, aged 28 or 29 from epilepsy. That, by the way, just
what year was that?
1882. Let me just check. I have it here in front.
Now, there's something you need to be careful of when you see someone dying in the workhouse, because they have the fever hospitals and the infirmaries as part of the workhouses. He may have been in hospital.
Right. Okay. I think I remember you saying that before. So,
and the significance is that we cannot presume that people die in the workhouse at that time, that it isn't part of the fever hospitals, which our modern day hospitals are built on the sites of those workhouses in some cases.
Right. Is that why we keep finding graves?
The hospitals, yes, it is. So it's something that you need to be aware of. That would be the case in Croom, where I had came across a lot of deaths in the workhouse, quote, but it wasn't the workhouse. It was actually the infirmary in the hospital. So they died in hospital like anybody does today, but it wouldn't have been put down as the new, because the hospitals were so new at that time.
Just
so you have to be careful of that.
I noticed, and this is really, I don't know if this is true, I noticed that some of my family do have a bit of a shake in the hand, and I was like, what, not like nobody has Parkinson's, nobody has any kind of degenerative diseases, and I remember asking, I was like, where did you get the shake from? And I noticed it too, and that's why it was really, apart from the genealogy, knowing where my family came from, that was very important to me, but getting the death certs, knowing what everyone died from, and trying to even build a genetic picture of like any of the conditions that may be passed down. And the epilepsy one, actually, when I informed my family about that, they weren't very happy with that. They were almost like rejecting it. Like they didn't like knowing that the great-great-grandfather passed away from epilepsy. I know it's kind of strange, but just to be aware.
Stuff, that's why we always need sensitivity when we're looking at these. And just to have some interest here, that what we've got nationally reflects in the international world of cholera, which is a huge epidemic, then raging in Europe, and it had reached England in 1831 and was expected to appear in Ireland at the time. So there's a wonderful handbill in Wicklow from this wicklowheritage.org, places and county, and circulated. And at a meeting of the inhabitants of the Wicklow town held at Mr. Halpin's Hotel, they had following resolutions where they wanted a society for the purpose of ameliorating the conditions of the poor of Wicklow, quote, with a view of enabling them to meet the apprehended approach of contagious diseases. They weren't that interested in helping the people because they were poor. It was to stop the spread of disease. There's a self-interest here of contagious disease, because they know they can catch contagious diseases just as the poor can. So
do you know
they want to promote cleanliness and warmth in their persons and habitations. No relief shall be extended without the actual inspection of 2 or more members of this society, whose duty it shall be to ascertain the extent and nature of the relief necessary in each case and how desirable it is to apply it. The town should be divided into 6 districts, and 2 members of the society be appointed to each, and they actually inspect the actual conditions of the inhabitants. And very, very interesting to see how they're managing that and how much relief they can do. So in 1833, the disease in Wicklow first made its appearance in Arklow in 1832. Between them and 1833, there were 83 reported cases, 51 which resulted in death. Other areas of the county were the villages of Kilcool, where there was an outbreak of cholera in 1832, Delgany, where the disease made a late appearance in November 1833, and it made no reference to the disease having made an appearance in Wicklow town. Maybe it was to do with that committee, so on.
Well, like,
So,
yeah, do you see that later on down there about the ignorance about the disease as well? There earlier on, they said that there were the person who reported the irregular building. They said there was plenty of spring water. So something must have happened to the drinking water supply, because earlier on it said it was fine in Wicklow
well,
town.
there's a belief that it was poisoned, I believe.
Oh,
Now,
right.
on the night of the 12th of June, 1832, the sub-inspector of police in Wicklow, William Johnston, received an alarming report from the chief constable at Rathdrum in 1832. Sir, I beg to inform you that this town is in the greatest state of alarm, possible by several men running into it without either shoes or stockings. Several had not even a hat on, throwing bits of turf into the houses of Roman Catholics, telling them to take the cure and pray to keep the cholera away, as several hundreds are dead at the other side of the mountains. I sent up to Glenmalure to find out, and one person told my man that they were burning the towns at the other end in consequence of the plague. However, all the Protestants think that there's going to be a general rising immediately. The state of alarm is beyond description. At 3 a.m. the following morning, the sub-inspector at Wicklow wrote in some panic to his superiors in Dublin Castle to alert them of this and the other extraordinary occurrences in the neighbourhood. The communication was forwarded from one house to another by the signal of a piece of burnt stick or turf, and the ostensible reason given for this proceeding was to preserve the inmates from cholera, which was said to have broken out at Glenmalure, to protect them from a ball of fire, which it was stated had burnt up the town of Carlow, with other reasons equally preposterous. You will perceive that from the enclosed letter from Mr. Lefroy, the chief constable, that great alarm prevailed at Rathdrum. And I beg also to state that the inhabitants of Wicklow have been in considerable consternation. Many families have sat up during the night. Several persons without shoes, stockings, or hat were found knocking at doors with burnt sticks and have been taken into custody by their inhabitants. So they let the magistrates know, and they had a wider phenomenon spread out from this whole insurrection in Rathdrum, or perceived insurrection, from 1832. So this involved very much superstition, the type of superstition you see in South America. There were reports of apparitions and Blessed Virgin and warnings of impending disaster. So this blessed turf or straws or sticks are based on superstition, and the prayers then are used to be said to protect the household. But it's seen by the Crown forces as widespread conspiracy, and this area is known as being an area of disquiet. So very interesting areas there for Rathdrum. Would you not agree?
Yeah, it kind of speaks to a little bit about my grandfather, because my grandfather ended up being a very strong labor leader in the 50s and 40s here. The poverty was pretty bad, I think, in my family for quite a long time. And I didn't know it went back this far. So if there's a history obviously passed down about this kind of thing, but this is really strange about the reaction to the cholera. I mean, it's 1833. Like, I mean, this
People
kind
were
of
terrified of it. It's a new disease. It's a terrible disease, and if you see some paintings of that type, of the dehydration and the picture of cholera, it's absolutely horrendous. So it's a very frightening physical appearance of cholera. Is terrifying. So that is one aspect to keep that. So where are you going, just to finalize, Ian, where are you going with your final journey of the temples now that you've started?
Well, I want to find John Temple's extended. Now that we've made today with Bridget Byrne, I need to go down that line and find out where exactly are we in Ireland all the time, or is there a family that comes over at some time, maybe during the Huguenots or anything like that. And then also, once I'm finished there, I'll go down the road of discovering the Balance family, as I found a Boston Herald article from 1847, I think. I might get the date wrong, where a certain James Balance was looking for a missing brother who'd emigrated to Philadelphia at some point, or Boston. He was in, I think he'd emigrated to Philadelphia, but the Boston Herald article was about, it was just mentioned that he'd gone through there, but he might be living in Boston. So if that necessitated a trip to the United States, that'd be cool. But I just want to get a full picture of who we were, what we worked as, and what we lived in, because I happen to believe that that really shapes like who you are, like both physically and mentally. I don't think that, genetically you just disappear, those people disappear. You're very like them. Maybe not, I mean, people are obsessed with what they look like, but even the way you act, what they were good at, I think it's very important.
Well, Ian, thanks a million. And we'll have you on again as you're progressing through your journey. And today's show was to look at some of the sources you can just find through heritage sites and through heritage sources on Wicklow, and keep your information broader, because we found loads of sources for Athdrum in that 1832 article. And we became suddenly aware of the effects of cholera, how frightened people were of that disease, and what impact it had on entering Ireland in the 1830s. So Ian, thanks a million for your
thank you, Lorna,
your radio appearance today, and we'll certainly have you on again. Thanks folks for listening. The show is podcast out on Sunday and airs out through the whole world, so we're delighted to have that. Our season in September is going to be focusing on place and space, so we'll be doing a lot of things like today on places and so on. And thanks very much for listening.